This is the first. This is the beginning of the major manifesto of Q-liminal, and it's my duty to explain to the world what Q-liminal entails. And basically, Q-liminal is the 21st century criteria, intuitive criteria for the 21st century art. It reestablishes a criteria that was broken by Picasso in 1907 with Le Demoiselles d'Avignon, with the painting of Le Demoiselles d'Avignon. And what Q-liminal has discovered, and I'm the founder of Q-liminal, is that there is a Picasso's statement in '07 was there is no criteria for art, that because all criteria is contrived. And through the 20th century, what they were trying to achieve was some form of criteria, but they didn't. They never succeeded in forming a criteria. They are an aesthetic. I'll put it this way: an aesthetic criteria. They never achieved that, and all they could do was tack on what I call a connotative aesthetic, or an extrinsic aesthetic. That means that the aesthetic was tacked onto the painting, and a lot of the paintings didn't have any aesthetic value. They had a philosophy tacked onto them. Well, the discovery that Q-liminal was made, and I'm the founder of Q-liminal, I've made the major discoveries. And the first discovery is that there is a true aesthetic, but it's not an objective aesthetic. The true aesthetic is the intuitive aesthetic. I've discovered the universal intuitive aesthetic, and a color form asserts. Now, the universal intuitive aesthetic, the reason why it works is because it's not based on geometry like they tried in the Renaissance for an objective aesthetic, and it's not based on a connotative aesthetic, something that's tacked on to a painting. It's like with Rothko's or any of the 20th century paintings. Actually, what you see is what you get. And people read all these mysterious things into them because the philosophers like Greenberg, etc., and the art critics went along with this. Actually, it's connotative BS, philosophical BS attached to a painting. And that's come Rothko sold so many paintings. His paintings are what you see. If you see a square, that's what you see. Well, what we've discovered, William de Kooning, you probably remember him. He was a great abstract expressionist of the 20th century. Me and de Kooning were friends for a long time. We met on 6th Street in San Francisco. But I'm going to keep this as short as possible. But anyhow, me and him wondered what, because the criteria for abstract expressionism was becoming so nebulous and loose that there wasn't any way to tie them in. And so after 33 years after this discussion with William de Kooning, I researched this. I'm an aesthetic axiologist. I was a painter for about 25 years, but I became an aesthetic axiologist, always looking for this criteria and never finding it, and always going past the money. And I found out that the criteria is based. The criteria that we've discovered is based on the works of Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner in intuitive thought, and it's not scientific. It is intuitive. The reason why we can have this and it not be contrived is because it's spontaneous, intuitive. In other words, the paintings are painted spontaneously. It's called with attention to the universal intuitive aesthetic. And what the painting means when it's painted spontaneously, it means there's no forethought in it. It happens spontaneous, like the automatic paintings. But there's an aesthetic added that is intuitive in all people. And we follow that aesthetic, and and that's what creates the painting. Therefore, it's not a contrived aesthetic. It's a spontaneous aesthetic. And the criteria is not contrived, it's intuitive. And these are the two major discoveries of Q-liminal for the 21st century. Now, the reason why they're so significant is because they reestablish a true aesthetic for the 21st century. It's not a standard or anything; it's a spontaneous criteria, but it's based on the intuitive. And this brings back the love of form and beauty that was missing in a lot of 20th century paintings. And it is a vanguard directive for all major art forms of the 21st century to date. Somebody might discover, but this is the biggest discovery in 100 years. And the reason why is because it's the closest thing to an objective criteria we have, a value system, an axiology. And like I said, I'm an aesthetic axiologist, which means that we study the value systems of art and why they're valuable. And what we've discovered is that paintings, to be truly valuable, intrinsically valuable, they must have some attention to the ideas of aesthetics established by the philosophers of the past. And much like architecture, it should have a historic evolution. And the criteria is based on these two ideas, the chronological indica and the universal intuitive aesthetic and color form assertion, the three ideas. And these ideas are intuitive, non-contrived, and the closest thing to objective that we've achieved in the 21st century. That's in the criteria. The reason why a lot of the abstract expressionists and a lot of the artists of that day is the reason why they were suicidal is because they had not internalized criteria. They knew that their paintings had, especially the abstract expressionists, they knew their paintings had no intrinsic value. That their paintings were based on an extrinsic philosophy, which means that the philosophy was read into the painting, and that's why you get all this ooh and ah. And it's the same way as with the Mona Lisa effect. The Mona Lisa really isn't that great of a painting. What makes it valuable isn't its intrinsic value; it's its extrinsic value, the mystique of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa smile is it's enigmatic. That's correct, but there's no. It's more based on a mystique and the fame of the painting, and its historic significance. Whereas the culiminal paintings are based on this color form assertion, the spontaneous color form assertion with attention to the universal intuitive aesthetic. And the painting directly in back of me as an example, this is the archetypal for the 21st century. This is the visual expression of the universal intuitive aesthetic with attention to color form assertions. The forms were asserted in a spontaneous manner, and the colors and forms are spontaneous. And then we, at the liminal state of mind, that's why it's called liminal art. At the liminal state of mind, where the mind is at the threshold and loves form and beauty, from the conscious to the unconscious, the inherent love of form and beauty is followed, but the forms are followed spontaneously. So the criteria in it is intrinsic, because it's intuitive. And this is why the paintings are valuable, and this is why it's the logical progression of abstract expressionism, and this is why that it's the closest thing to objectively valuable we have, intrinsically valuable. And there's science to back up to the values of this. And we don't set it as a standard because it's based on intuitive. The intuitive, and this one isn't the most magnificent painting I've done. But what I did is I didn't go past the universal intuitive aesthetic. I stayed under. It's like an unfinished painting. But the other ones I've slashed because some were overdeveloped. But this is below the money, but most of the paintings will go beyond the money. This is below the money, but It's here. It's the archetypal to illustrate the effect of color form assertion when it's applied to things like action paintings. It still has the spontaneous ideology to it, but it's based on this intuitive and the color form assertion. I hate to be repetitive, so I'm going to quit right